Hey everybody, this is Peter.
I'm Keaton.
And we're here today to talk to you about some espresso basics to help you brew better coffee.
And now we cut to some...
Cut to the song and the music, and our titles were there. So knowing what the industry standards are for espresso is really important, but what's maybe even more important is knowing what a good shot of alchemy espresso blend should taste like, or having a benchmark for that. So if you remember from our previous video, the Brewing Principles and Theory, we talk about 4 basic qualities that a really good cup of coffee could have or should have. Those are clarity, complexity, sweetness, and balance. We also like to include 2 more that are a little bit more specific with espresso, and those are a heavy syrupy body and a long lingering pleasant finish. Because of the way espresso is brewed, obviously it's much stronger. The finish has a way of lasting for a much longer period of time. So we want to focus not just what we're tasting and experiencing while we're drinking the espresso, but what is it leaving us with as well.
Yeah, a lot of times that's my favorite part of the drink. So in order to achieve those 6 factors that Peter is talking about, at Deeper Roots Coffee we use a blend that we call Alchemy. It's made up of 50% Brazil from Sao Paulo state. That gives us that weighty body, that syrupiness that Peter was talking about. We use 25% San Miguel, Guatemala. It's gonna give us some more chocolatiness, some sweetness, a little bit of spice floating on the top, and 25% natural Ethiopia from Chantuene, which gives us that cherry note that we love in Alchemy. So before we dive into the specifics of espresso extraction, let's just do a quick recap of extraction theory in general and the brewing variables that we use to achieve that. It helps to think of extraction on a spectrum, where on one side we have under-extracted, meaning there was some flavor there that we left in the grounds. Under-extracted coffees tend to be weak, sour, just uninspiring. Over-extracted coffees, on the other hand, mean that there were some flavors that we pulled from that coffee that really were best left in there. Those are bitter, ashy, that kind of carbony, unpleasant, acrid flavor. Those we want to stay away from. In order to make that happen, there are a bunch of different variables that we can use and that we do have access to use for espresso. But as a barista, there really are only 3 that you're going to be worried about on a day-to-day basis. And those are the grind size, the brewing ratio, meaning how much coffee is going in versus how much beverage is coming out, and the time. The time is really going to be more of a demarcator. It's going to be used for you to know when something's changed or when you need to make an adjustment, but it is still something that we want to pay attention to as a variable.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into the 3 brewing variables that Keaton just mentioned. When we discuss extraction with coffee, typically the first variable that we can change to have the most influence over that extraction is going to be the grind size. And that can actually be a lot more apparent with espresso because we're dealing with such finely ground coffee. So small changes to your grind setting can make a big difference when it comes to flavor in the cup. And if you remember our analogy from our previous video, more finely ground coffee is more like sand. So the water will take a much longer time to pass through the coffee. Therefore, it'll pull more out of the coffee. So in general, you can think of grind size as controlling the flow rate of water through our coffee. More time that water spends in contact with coffee, generally the more extraction you're gonna get. But remember, like Keaton just said, there is a limit to how much extraction we want because we can start to develop those negative off flavors of over extraction if we pull too much out of the coffee. So it's really about striking a balance with our grind setting, that we're pulling out just enough that it's tasting amazing and we're not getting any of that junk we don't want at the end of the extraction.
Yeah, and that line is really fine from just the perfect, sweet, delicious espresso into a bit bitter and drying. Yeah. I love that you can think of it as like how much time the water is hanging out with it. It makes the grind size adjustment really easy to understand, that really all you're controlling for is how much time are the water and the coffee hanging out together.
Yeah, exactly. So the next brewing variable is brewing ratio, and this is the relationship between dose, which is the amount of dry coffee grounds you're putting into the portafilter basket, and the yield or the output. What we mean by that is how much brewed espresso do we end up with in our cups. And brewing ratio Although it can have a small effect on our extraction, we actually adjust that variable more to influence the strength of our shots. So if we have a shot and it's tasting a little watery and weak and we don't feel like it's an extraction issue, we can either increase the amount of coffee we're using, so the dose, or we can decrease the amount of water we're using, so we're ending up with less espresso in the cup.
Yeah, if you think about it, if there's more coffee in the portafilter to get flavor from, then you can wind up with a stronger flavor in the cup. Strength really has to do with how heavy and how weighty that flavor is.
Yeah, and strength is a funny thing because sometimes if your espresso or coffee is too strong, that can actually create these very similar flavors to over extraction. So it's all about finding a balance on that spectrum of both extraction and strength. And that's the job of the barista, is to manage these variables throughout the day on bar during their shift to make sure that the shots are flowing in the appropriate amount of time and that they're tasting really great.
Balance is absolutely the name of the game with espresso.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of leads us to the last variable that Keaton mentioned, which is extraction time. If it's helpful for you, it is for me. I actually think of extraction time more as an equation. So our brewing ratio plus our grind size can equal our extraction time. So by manipulating either the brewing ratio or the grind size, we can have an influence over how long our shots take, and that's what we mean by extraction time. So it's really a matter of manipulating those few variables to achieve something that tastes really great, that falls within the correct or appropriate parameters for espresso. And we actually have developed over the years a really, really great, reliable recipe, or we've given you those parameters for a great shot of alchemy. And we'll list those for you here now. So for the dose, we recommend 18 to 20 grams of coffee. So you will need a scale while you're dialing in your espresso. For the yield or the output, we recommend between 1.5 to 2 ounces of brewed espresso. If you're using weight as your metric, we recommend somewhere between 30 and 36 grams of brewed espresso.
And this should take about 25 to 30 seconds, give or take. Having a recipe for espresso is great. It's great to have these empiric data points of dose, yield, and time so that we can have a good benchmark for where to start when we're dialing in espresso. That being said, taste is king. We want an espresso that tastes good and that has that pleasant lingering finish above everything else. I'm sure Peter has as well, have had great shots that fell well outside those parameters, pulled much longer or shorter, used a greater or smaller yield that were delicious. So using that recipe as your starting point, you can make adjustments and really start to dial that espresso in to taste the way that you want it to taste. And if that sounds like a lot of information and a lot of numbers that we just threw at you, don't worry, we're gonna dial in some espresso right now. Let's dial in some espresso.
Yeah, so generally, Keaton, when I'm dialing in espresso, I try to keep all the variables pretty much the same, and by variables I mean my dose and my yield. I try to keep those consistent from shot to shot while I'm dialing in. And
just
based
change
on
one thing at a time.
Exactly, and
Right.
based on what I'm tasting and our extraction time, the total shot time, usually I'll just adjust the grind as needed to improve flavor, improve extraction. So before we kind of dive in, maybe we can see how much we get out with the grinder set to where it's at, how much
Sure.
total we get in the dose, and we'll just kind of go with that
Sure, yeah.
every time.
When you start out brewing espresso in the morning or any time of day really, first thing to do is just go ahead and pull a shot. We don't want to make any changes to begin with because we don't really know what we're working with yet. Want to make sure we're settling horizontally and vertically. I like to use a distribution tool to give me a nice even canvas to tamp with and a nice even light tamp. So the dose is right at 19 grams, which is good. It's where I would expect alchemy to be, but let's see how it tastes and how long it takes to pull.
And that's great. That's right in the middle of our range, that 18 to 20 gram range for the dose. So while we're dialing in, we're going to aim to have our dose be right around 19 grams every time.
Yep. A lot of machines will have shot timers built in. Ours does not, so we're utilizing a scale that has a timer built in so we can see how long it's taking.
So we let our shot flow all the way up until our target volume for our espresso.
Which for us was around 34 grams.
So I guess rather we would say our target weight of about 34 grams. So we're gonna give this a taste. So using the metrics of shot time and the dose and the yield along with what we're tasting and perceiving in the espresso, that's gonna inform us if we need to make a change to things like our grind or the brewing ratio.
An important thing to remember is when you're tasting espresso for evaluation, you always want to either swirl or stir in the crema. Crema, some people really dig it, but it is gonna have a sharp, sort of acrid taste. That's why when we serve espresso, we serve it with a spoon, but we don't pre-stir it. For us as baristas though, tasting for evaluation, we don't want to taste the crema, we want to taste the espresso itself.
Cool. Cheers.
Bottoms up.
Not bad, my first impression. I feel like there's a lot of really nice qualities there with this shot.
Yeah, plenty of sweetness. Some nice cherry acidity to it. I feel like what it's lacking for me is that finish that we're after. It's kind of acrid on the back end and it fades really quickly.
Yeah, the finish is slightly bitter. And for me, I don't know about you, Keaton, but for me, bitterness tends to present itself a little bit more often in the finish than in the actual flavor of the shot.
Yes.
So that's again kind of a reason why we focus so highly on not just the taste of the espresso while we're drinking it, but what it leaves us with after we take our sip, the finish.
Yes.
So a little bit bitter, a little astringent. It's kind of drying my mouth out a little bit. That's what astringency is. It's that drying effect. So both of those things are, in our experience, tasting coffee, tasting espresso, are qualities that an over-extracted coffee would have, an over-extracted espresso.
Yes.
And so that information, the sensory information, along with our measurable information, like objectively measurable, so the shot time, which was
which the shot
30,
ran a little bit long.
How many, do you remember?
It was around 30, 32 seconds.
Yeah, so on the higher end of our range for shot time. So if you remember, we're looking at both sensory information, but also the metric of shot time. And both of those things are telling us that this shot is probably over-extracted. So how we would correct that, again, if we're leaving our dose and our yield the same, we're going to slightly adjust our grind size so that the water flows faster through the coffee so that we end up with a shorter shot time and hopefully a little bit less extraction.
Right, if you remember Pete's example of the gravel and the sand from our previous video, we're gonna make it more trending towards the gravel. We want the water to spend less time with the coffee, so we're gonna make our grind size coarser.
That's the good stuff.
That's the good stuff.
Cool, so it looks like we've pulled our shot using the same dose. Thank you, Keaton. Using the same dose of coffee, about 19 grams. And we've also let that shot flow up to the same target output or yield of about 34, 36 grams. So the brewing ratio, we've kept the same. All we've changed is the grind. We made it coarser and our shot flowed up to that target volume or weight in 21 seconds, which is significantly faster than our previous shot. So theoretically, this shot should taste a whole lot different. Hopefully we've gotten rid of that bitter kind of astringent finish and aftertaste.
Right,
but
now,
who knows, we might have some other negative flavors here based on
my worry now is that we have shifted into being under extracted and we're gonna taste a pretty sour shot of espresso, but let's see. It is quite sour.
Agreed.
But we did get rid of that acrid aftertaste. I'm not gonna say that the finish is good, but it's not bitter and ashy any longer.
Yeah, the sourness there is, so sometimes I like to think of acidity, because a lot of people confuse acidity with sourness. Acidity is a version of sourness, but I kind of like to describe it as the pleasant version of sourness. So although it is sort of under that umbrella, when the sourness is this pleasant sort of juicy quality that adds value to the cup, that's when acidity is a good thing. And to me, this shot being under extracted, it has that negative, harsh acidity, so that sourness that's just really not pleasant to drink.
Yeah, it's an unpleasant sourness.
Yeah.
When I think of pleasant acidity, I think of things like lemonade or iced tea. This is has that more like sour candy vibe to it.
It's lacking balance is a great description, I think, too.
And just like we talked about with under extracted coffee earlier, it's very weak and just uninspiring. It's just very flat. So I think what we need to do, Peter, is tighten that grind a little bit, kind of split the difference between where we were before and where we moved to now.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is the same brewing ratio again, but our extraction time, our shot time was 25 seconds. So right there at the lower end of that range that we suggest, and I'm expecting something to taste really, really nice.
Me too.
It's delicious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's great. Really balanced, very sweet, nice lingering finish. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say that's bad about that.
Yeah, I think we've really hit the mark on a lot of those qualities, right? The complexity and clarity. There's some really nice fruity characteristics here. The sweetness is there, some nice cherry kind of sweetness, chocolate.
And we do have a nice syrupy body to it as well. If we did not have a syrupy body, that's where we might need to adjust the strength. And remember, strength is a function of the dose, how much coffee we're using in the portafilter. So if this body were a little light, we might increase the amount of coffee we're putting in there up to, say, 19.5 grams, but I actually think this is quite nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think the body is really exactly what we're hoping for with espresso.
Yeah.
Not too heavy and not too light, somewhere right in the middle, really balanced.
Yeah, delicious. Having really delicious espresso is important because it's the foundation of almost every drink we serve. And even though it seems like milk or flavoring might hide it, it'll show through no matter what.
And I think that the practice of tasting your shots while you dial in is only going to strengthen your palate. It's going to make you feel more confident in what you're tasting. And with time, it'll get easier and easier. So just like with everything else in life, practice makes perfect. Keep up with it, taste your shots, drink espresso. Yeah.
Live forever.
Have fun, too. Drink espresso, live forever. P.S. Have fun. P.S. I love you.